Jai Anilo Premadano Paramakacho
Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki is currently the founder of Srila Prabhupada ki Anand Koti Vaishnava in the Das Thakur ki then Prabhu Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Hare Krishna Parasipada Bhaktivedanta Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopina Shyama Kundara Kundari Gopinan ki Sri Vrindavan Dham ki Sri Madhava Dham ki Sri Mayapur Madhava Dham ki Jamuna Mani ki Brahma Devi ki Bhakti Devi ki Tulsi Devi ki Samaveta Bhakta Devi ki Sankirtan Yajna ki Sri Sri Radha Kalachandji Dham ki. All glory is assembled devotees. All glory is assembled devotees. All glory is assembled devotees. Go with it. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 12. Adina Lila Vasite Shanolasa Brahmanga Sansuchita Bhuhi Anugraham Iksheta Shintamayam Enam Ishvaram Yavam Mano Dharanaya Vastitate Adina Lila Hasite Kshanolasa Adina Lila Hashite Shanolasa Rupanga Sansuchita Bhuri Anugraham Rupanga Sansuchita Bhuri Anugraham Iksheta Chintamayam Enamishwaram. Iksheta Chintamayam Enamishwaram. Yavan Manodharana Yavaskitaste. Yavan Manodharana Yavaskitaste. Adina Vila Sitekshanola Guru Banga Samsuchita Puri Anugraham. Iksheta Chintamayam Enamishwaram. Yavan Manodharana Yavata Tishtate.
Adina Lila Hasiteshanola Adina Lila Hasiteshanola Anga Samsuchita Puri Anugraha Iksheta Chintamaya Enamishwaram Yavanmanodharana Yavatishtate Adina Lila Hasiteshanola Anga Samsuchita Puri Anugraha
Ladies.
Adina Lila Site Sanola Vanga Samsuchita Puri Anugraham Iksheta Chintamaya Menamishwaram Yavan Manodharana Yavatishtate
Adina, very magnanimous. Leela, pastimes. Hasita, smiling. Ikshana, by glancing over. Urdasat, glowing. Bruvanga, signals of the eyebrow. Sansuchita, indicated. Buddhi, extensive. Anugraham, benediction. Iksheta, one must concentrate. Chintamayam, transcendental. Enam, this particular. Ishvaram, the Supreme Lord. Yavat, as long as. Manaha, the mind. Dharanaya, by meditation. Avitishtate, can be fixed. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Lord's magnanimous pastimes and the glowing glancing of His smiling face are all indications of His extensive benedictions. One must therefore concentrate on this transcendental form of the Lord, as long as the mind can be fixed on Him by meditation. I will read and gradually comment, because the purport is quite long, so I'll divide it into a few parts and then try to explicate the purport. In Bhagavad Gita, 12th chapter, text 5, it is said that the impersonalist undergoes a series of difficult programs on account of his impersonal meditation. But the devotee, due to the Lord's personal service, progresses very easily. Impersonal meditation is therefore a source of suffering for the impersonalist. Here, the devotee has an advantage over the impersonalist philosopher. The impersonalist is doubtful about the personal feature of the Lord, and therefore he always tries to meditate upon something which is not objective. For this reason, there is an authentic statement in the Bhagavatam regarding the positive concentration of the mind on the factual form of the Lord. The 12th chapter, which is referred to here in this purport, opens with Krishna being questioned by his disciple, Arjuna. And Arjuna asks Krishna specifically, I'll read the question he asks. It says, which are considered to be more perfect? Those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifest? And Krishna responds, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshiping me with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be most perfect. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of the Absolute Truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engaged in the welfare of all at last achieve me. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested personal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. So there are two conceptions which are described here. the personal and the impersonal. In the Bhagavatam, first canto, it is also mentioned that Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shaktite. Three aspects of God are discussed there. The personal, the impersonal, and the localized aspect, or the Lord within the heart. And that text of the Bhagavatam explains that those who are seers of the truth understand the truth in three features, and that those three features are actually features of the same one truth. The example is often given of the sun, the sunshine, and the sun god. Of course, we know at least of these two, the sun and the sunshine. We are not so familiar with the sun god. The sun and the sunshine are two aspects of the same thing. The sunshine, of course, depends upon the sun planet. Without the sun planet, there would be no sunshine. But similarly, as long as there's a sun planet, there must also be sunshine. Those who only know of the sunshine but don't know of the sun planet have an incomplete understanding of the sun. It's just like you might be inside your home and unable to look out of the window and not be able to see the sun. Imagine if you were in that position. So all you could see was the light of the day. That knowledge would be partial knowledge of the sun. But if you could come out of your house and look up in the sky, you would have a more complete knowledge. Now there is a still more complete knowledge, which is that, and that knowledge is not available to our sense perception, namely the knowledge of a being or a deity that controls the sun god. That type of knowledge we have to gain from authoritative sources, which are able to give us knowledge beyond sense perception. In the same way, people are aware of the energy of God, even if they don't know the source of the energy is God. We see everywhere around us energy. And the Vedas call that energy Brahman, the all-pervading aspect of God. That means God's all-pervasive energy. But just as knowledge of the sun god has to come from a superior source, similar knowledge of the source of the energy, namely knowledge of God, cannot come by sense perception, at least not immediately. And therefore, because so much importance, so much emphasis is given today, in today's world, to verify whatever we know through sense perception, people become doubtful about the existence of God. Of course, there are many fields of knowledge, especially in the natural sciences, just like quantum physics, deals with things which are not perceivable. It deals with, for example, even such a simple thing, in one sense, simple, but it was always understood. During the time, say 200 or 300 years ago, Newtonian physics, people judged things to be objects, concrete objects. But as science progressed, it was understood that there was more basic fundamental units of existence, namely atoms. But quantum physics brought this knowledge to another level of understanding, namely that there are not simply atoms, but there are waves, particles of waves. And obviously these waves cannot be seen by sense perception, but they can be understood by their effects. Now, if we apply that same logic to understanding God, we can also derive the existence of God. Of course, this is not a new idea, because Thomas Aquinas gave proofs for the existence of God. He used logical proofs, showing that there must be a uncaused cause or unmoved mover. There must be an origin to what we perceive, because everything that we perceive which has existence has some other cause, and that in turn has another cause. But when you trace it back to that original cause, which has no cause, that original cause, which is uncaused by anything else, is called God. Sarva Karana Karana. The same statement is there. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karana. In the Brahma Samhita, the same statement is there, that Krishna is defined. Ishvara Parama Krishna. Krishna is Param Ishvara, the supreme controller, the supreme Lord. In this verse also the word Ishvara, Lord. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha. This Krishna has an eternal body, Satchit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss, all blissful form. Anadir Adir Govinda, he is the source of everything. He is the beginning of everything. Sarva Karana Karana, he is the cause without any cause. He's the cause of all causes, but he himself has no cause. So this Krishna is Vigraha, he has form, and that issue is now being addressed here, because we may come to the conclusion that there is God, but then what is the nature of God? Traditionally, God was believed to have attributes. We have attributes, so God has attributes, because the statement that human beings are made in God's image was taken literally. So if we have a body, God must have a body, or at least if we have beauty, let's say it this way. If we have beauty, God has beauty. If we have strength, God has strength. If we have knowledge, God has knowledge. And so many other qualities. We are limited, but God must be unlimited. We are embodied in a temporary body. God must be eternal. God must be all-knowing, but supreme in all of these qualities. Now, some persons have considered that this is too simplistic, that we are simply projecting on God qualities which we have, but that's not proper. And such persons who think in this way, but still hold to the conception that there is something which can be called God, they're called impersonalists. Impersonalists believe in God, but do not restrict God to any one form. And they go a little further than that. They ultimately say, the kind of impersonalists that is described here, that God has no location, God has no form, God is the basis of everything, or God is everything. It can be expanded to say, God is everything. In that sense, impersonalists say that we are also part of God. At the present moment, we are separated from God due to illusion. We are actually God. They use the example of a drop of water merging into the ocean. One drop of water may be seen to have its own existence, but when the water falls into the ocean, it loses its own individuality. So as long as we are embodied, as we presently are, so we see individual beings. You are there, I am here, he or she is beside us. But once we leave this body, once we die, we emerge into the existence of God. This is impersonalism. Now, this verse of the Bhagavatam speaks about a very different conception. Again, using the example of the sun and the sunshine. Personalism is like sunshine, is equal to the conception of sunshine. the sunshine pervades everything, all over the universe. But we know that that shining effulgence of the sun has a source, the sun planet. And from the Bhagavatam, we get information that there's also a sun god. And similarly, the all-pervasive energy, which impersonalists believe is God, which is existing everywhere, is mentioned here as having a source. And that source is Krishna. When we say Krishna, the name Krishna means he who is all attractive. It is one of the names. God has unlimited names. And he's called Krishna, he who attracts everything and everyone. How does he do this attracting that is mentioned? He does so by his very merciful pastimes. Pastimes means activities. Now, some people will say that the pastimes of God are the unfolding activities of mankind. In other words, if we're impersonalists, we would say that the activities which we are engaged in are all part of God's activities. But the Bhagavatam is speaking of something very different. As you can see, decorating our walls are so many pictures which depict pastimes, lila, of God. This is something that the impersonalists will immediately say are temporary activities. They'll say, all right, God who is unborn, God who has no form, God who is everything, takes a form, descends as Krishna for some time, and then sort of evaporates. But that's not confirmed by Scripture. Scripture says, Satchit Ananda Vigraha. The Brahma Samhita that I quoted says that Krishna's form is not temporary. It can't evaporate. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes that my form cannot be cut. It cannot be pierced. It cannot be burned. It cannot be withered. It's an eternal form. And also my activities, he says, are also eternal. And how is that? How can these pictures be depicting something which is eternal? How can a particular activity be eternal? That is also explained. That God, Krishna, comes within this world and shows some of the activities which he eternally performs in the kingdom of God. The example is given that just as the sun rises at a certain time and then sets at another time, and we see the sun moving through the sky, and we mark off the hours of the day, 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning. But 6 in the morning, it is always 6 in the morning somewhere. It is always 7 in the morning somewhere else. As soon as it ceases to be 6 here, it's 6 o'clock in Denver. And when it stops being 6 o'clock in the morning in Denver, it's still 6 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles. So it's always 6, it's always 7, it's always 8. All 24 hours exist continuously. It just depends on where you are on the planet that you will say at a particular time it's 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. In the same way, Krishna's activities, each and every one of his activities, is always going on somewhere. As soon as he finishes his particular activity here, somewhere else he's showing that activity, because it's described that he comes again and again. Krishna descends in this universe at one time, and when he completes his descent in this universe, he descends in another universe. And when he completes that period of showing these wonderful activities, he descends into another universe. So as soon as one activity is finished here, it's starting to be performed somewhere else. And all of these activities are available to be seen in the kingdom of God, the spiritual world. So these activities are magnanimous. Why? Because the nature of these activities is that they are conducive of perfect happiness. Just like when we we undergo many activities, but we don't rate all of them in the same way. For example, a nightmare is something which doesn't, is not pleasant, it doesn't bring joy, and you would rather not that it not be repeated. On the other hand, you might meet a friend who you have missed for a long time and consider that that activity was very pleasant. You might eat a nice dinner, and that's also very pleasant. There are some activities which are full of pleasure. But these activities they're all spoiled by one factor, namely time. Just like some of you have come to visit for the weekend, but you know very well that Sunday evening is going to come, and Monday is going to come, and you're not going to be sitting here. You're going to have to go back to either school, or a job, or whatever else is awaiting you. And you can't avoid that. So as much fun as we may have, that lingering notion of time dispels the possibility of perfect happiness. And there is, therefore, we see that in everything within this world, the time factor is present. And that is why it is described as Shashvatam, that this material universe is Mrityuloka, it is Shashvatam. It is temporary, and Mrityuloka means it is a place of death. Now, we might not think of, why we should be thinking of death. It's just like we're sitting here, we're all perfectly happy, healthy, and why mention death? Because every one of us is in a state of dying at every moment. When you say to someone, how old are you? You don't say, how young are you? Because the idea is you're getting older. How old are you? From the moment you're born, what happens? You start to die. And you can say that you're just starting to be, to live. It's just a question of how you want to look at it. But the fact is that with each moment, you're getting closer to your death. Therefore, this place is called Mrityuloka. And the funny thing is, just as the great king Yudhisthira was asked, what is the most amazing of all, things in this world? And he said, the most amazing thing is that although everyone will die, and everyone has seen that their ancestors have died, somehow they hold out the hope that they will not die. That's amazing. And it's not just human beings that hold on to that hope. Even an insignificant insect, an ant, for example. If you see an ant crawling across a table and you put your finger there, that ant will avoid the finger. The ant will struggle to survive. Every living being has this inborn, instinct to somehow survive. And yet Yudhisthira said it's amazing, especially for human beings, because human beings can reason. And human beings with their reason can understand, one day I'm going to die. But look at how much, look at how costly death is, in the sense that the industry of death, for example, to avoid death, for example, to keep the body youthful, is a huge medical industry, and other things, cosmetic industry. What's the cosmetic industry all about? Restoring youth to the body. What does a woman do when she makes up her face? She tries to put more life into the face. It's so much cost. And if people can't do it with cosmetics, then they do it with surgery. But sooner or later, old age comes and nothing will hide, the facts of life. Then you have to get on to the next thing, insurance policies. So that since you're not going to be able to survive, at least those who you love should get something from your death. But still you're not satisfied, and you have to arrange for your funeral, and then your burial. And what is the purpose of burial? At least the Vedic system has some sense about it. They just said, when the body dies, the best thing to do is to cremate it. Because what is the point of putting a dead corpse in a box? in a casket. And then you sink the skeleton and the flesh, which is starting to rot, into the ground, and so many people come and, pay their respects. And then year after year, what are they paying respect to? They're paying respects to your memory, fine. But why the box and the corpse? I mean, that's not who you are, a dead corpse. They're not paying respect. I don't think they even want to think of it that way. I mean, when you think of someone who you love, who's passed away, do you think of them as a dead corpse in a box? And if you do, that's probably pretty popular these days. It's getting more popular. That type of worship of dead corpses in boxes. Or dead corpses out of boxes. Huh? Yeah, well, that may be popular, but that's not very intelligent. So, the fact is, Krishna's form doesn't die. It's described that when Krishna got ready to finish his activities, his pastimes in this world, he was seen to take off right into the ether. He went right up into the sky. Now, of course, we also hear that Jesus did that. But that's not, unique to Jesus. There are many persons who are able to transcend death. As a matter of fact, every one of us does transcend death. Most of us just can't do it with their body. But the soul transcends death. The soul doesn't die. And some great personalities are able to leave without even having to give up their body. Now you may say, well, that's very good, that's what I want to do with that. It doesn't really matter whether you do that or not. That's inconsequential. Because in order to do that, your body has to become eternal. The only way that your body can survive death is if the body becomes eternal. And under normal circumstances, an eternal body is not, your material body doesn't get transformed into a spiritual body. There are some very rare instances where this is described in scriptures happening, just like with Dhruva Maharaj. His body was transformed into an eternal form. There are some instances like this. It is said that the Pandavas were able to enter into the higher planets and into the kingdom of God they didn't have to die in the same way. But we should not expect such a miraculous thing. Rather, we should understand that we're going to have to give up this body. And therefore, we have to cultivate detachment. In any case, Krishna's pastimes are not like this. These pastimes that we see, the beauty of them is that they are not limited by the time factor. They go on. The persons who you see with Krishna in these pictures, they're always with Krishna. And this is one of the great attractions of wanting to worship God, that we can be with someone who we love eternally. And people want that. We want that. And the relationships with Krishna are perfect, because God is full and complete in all respects. When you have a relationship with someone in this world, it's more or less a relationship of trying to fulfill each other. You try to give to the other something that person lacks, whatever it may happen to be. But just imagine a person who is full in all respects, who is complete in every respect, who doesn't love you because of what they expect to get from you, but who simply loves you because it's the nature of that person to love you. Now, if you consider what the definition of love is, you'll admit that this is really what love means. Love should be selfless. Love should be unmotivated. Love should not be, I'll love you if. There shouldn't be any conditions placed on love. If you place conditions on love, is it really love? It is stated that the closest example to seeing love in this world is an infant baby in the arms of its mother. Because what can the mother hope to get from that baby? Practically nothing. But the mother just naturally shows love to the child. Nowadays, you can see that even that example is hard to find, isn't it? I mean, at least we see horrible perversions, where, for example, mothers abort their babies. They kill their babies while the baby's in the womb. They hire someone to kill the baby before the baby even gets out of the womb. Sometimes we hear nowadays about people murdering their small children. So we're living in a very, very bizarre time now. Things are not getting better. I mean, I know that it is said that, science has progressed to the point where we have a better standard of life. But overall, the quality of life is really not so much better. People's behavior has not become more civilized, it's become less civilized. Just like our devotees, right, they go to the concert to distribute Prabhupada's books. And, well, at least what they tell me, that, it's like a nightmare. Right? They went to one concert and, people were, they should describe the people. I mean, anyway, you probably all went to these concerts, so I don't want to have to describe it. At least the concert they went to it was a real, I guess you could call it like a freak show or something. It was something very bizarre. Because people's minds have become twisted. The conception, sometimes I tell this to our young girls here, I try to convince them that your youth, you're already beautiful. I try to tell them that you're already beautiful. If you just lead a pure life, you're already beautiful. You cannot increase your beauty by makeup. That's impossible if you're young. But the problem is that nowadays people's conception of what is beautiful is more or less shaped by the media, by television or the movies, or what a hero is. What are the heroes today? The heroes are like RoboCop, Terminator. What are they? They're machines. It's very interesting to study this point. That in the past, heroes, were like Prince, gallants, right? Coming, riding on a horse, very attractive, at least alive. Real blood that didn't flow. Hero's blood, you weren't supposed to see the hero's blood. Nowadays, you still don't see the hero's blood, but the reason you don't see it is it doesn't have blood. He's a machine. And the advantage of a hero being a machine is that he has no feelings. That means that he can kill without mercy. He can just slaughter millions of persons and not feel anything. And you think about it, the heroes of today's films, there are many of them are machines. And so this becomes the standard of what human life should be. That you can, for example, see others in pain and not feel any sorrow. What is the whole purpose, practically, of the incarnation of Buddha? The Buddha is the founder of a great religion. What is the main quality that Buddha is known for? Yeah, compassion. Right? We say that Buddha, compassionate Buddha. And Prabhupada once told me, he said, I could never stand to see others suffer. So even from the time I was young, he said, I could never stand to see others suffer. He used to tell this story of he saw one day passing by a butcher in Calcutta, and the butcher was chopping off the head of chickens. And the chickens would still, flap their wing a little and run, which they apparently do, even after the head is cut off for a few moments. And the father, butcher, who was doing this, was laughing and laughing. But his child who was sitting next to him was crying. Prabhupada gave this very vivid example. And the father was saying to the child, why don't you laugh? Why don't you laugh? The child said, laugh. So, children instinctively, feel some compassion, unless they're trained to feel otherwise. And that's the problem today. That the training is wrong. The training is completely wrong. The models, the examples that we're shown are not good examples. They're bizarre examples. So for girls were always, wanted to appear attractive. But now, what is the sign of attraction? What is the look of attraction today? It's a very different look. It's a very interesting fact to see how, as time passes, what appears to be beautiful, the conceptions of beauty change. And especially if you look at women's fashions. They're very, very interesting because they reveal a great deal about, the human psychology of what was fashionable 200-300 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago. And now, what is fashionable is unisex, for example. Clothes which can fit any gender. Haircuts which are suited for any gender. Jobs which are fit for any gender. Unisex. So the whole conception, which was said to be, it has a very sacred basis, doesn't it? I mean, at least if you're a Christian, for example, one of the first things that God does is He defines this is a man and this is a woman. And it's not just that God does it, He does it also through nature. In other words, a man's body and a woman's body are constructed differently. And by nature's arrangement, they're normally attracted to each other. And that attraction allows for procreation, for generation, for continuing the species. But when you go into unisex, that there's only one sex, then basically what you're saying is no more procreation. And therefore we see more and more homosexuality, which means no more procreation. But that's what it means. And you have many cases where people get married and, they have an option. That's like the whole pro-choice movement in regard to abortion is basically saying we have an option. The purpose of sex is not to generate offspring. Well, human beings are the first to ever proclaim this. There's no other species in the world that says the purpose of sex is not to generate offspring. Only human beings say that then. And they didn't say that in the past. That was the natural outcome. And there's a reason why that's the natural outcome. Because, first of all, it procreates, it furthers these generations. And secondly, it is the burden. And that's, I guess I'm now going to go into the second part of this purport. The process of meditation recommended here is Bhakti-yoga, or the process of devotional service after one is liberated from the material conditions. Jnana yoga is the process of liberation from the material conditions. After one is liberated from the conditions of material existence, when one is nivritta, as previously stated, or when he is free from all material necessities, one becomes qualified to discharge the process of Bhakti-yoga. Therefore, Bhakti-yoga includes Jnana-yoga, or in other words, the process of pure devotional service simultaneously serves the purpose of Jnana-yoga. Liberation from material conditions is automatically achieved by the gradual development of pure devotional service. I'm going to stop momentarily before I go on to this other point. Yoga means to link with God. And sometimes it is said that because linking with God comes in stages, there are different stages of yoga. So, one of the stages is described as Jnana yoga. Another stage, Bhakti yoga. Jnana yoga means the yoga of Jnana. Jnana means to know, from gnosis. The word gnosis, Greek word, just like Gnostics, comes from the Sanskrit word jnana, to know. So, to know God, to learn about God, brings liberation. What does liberation mean? Freedom from the cycle of repetition of birth and death. That's liberation. Sanskrit, the word moksha, salvation. And Christians say salvation. To become free from birth, or let's say from death, because they don't say that there's birth and death repeatedly. In the Hindus and the Buddhist traditions, they say reincarnation, again and again, to be born again. When Christians say born again, what does it mean? Something different, right? When you're born again, that's it. That means no more death. You're born eternally. But when we say born again and again, and again. That's reincarnation. But there is a birth, which means no more, which is similar to the Christian born again movement. That is a spiritual birth in the kingdom of God. But there's some agreement at that point. So liberation means when you get free from the causes of birth and death. What are the causes of birth and death? What causes repeated birth? Karma. But what is it? What is the karma? Why does karma linger within us? Why is that? Yeah, material desires are the cause. So, karma, we say karma lingers on the soul. But that karma comes as a result of desires. So liberation means to become free of these desires. Jnana means to understand that everything within this world is temporary. Because it's temporary, it won't last. It's not ultimately real. In this system of knowledge, we distinguish reality from illusion. Reality is that which is permanent or endures. Illusion is that which is temporary. So, a jnani, a person of knowledge, analyzes everything in life and sees, this is not permanent, this is not permanent, this is not real, this is not real, this is not real. And so, such a person becomes detached. I would say that everyone sitting here has some degree of that knowledge. We have come to the realization that things of this world are temporary. So we have a certain degree of detachment. Now, what follows that level of yoga is the next and highest level, bhakti. Bhakti means devotional service. And Bhakti-yoga begins from the point of anartha nivritti. Anartha nivritti means when one gives up anarthas, unwanted desires. You can then perform devotional service to God. If you are doing service to God in order to get certain material desires fulfilled, that's not pure devotional service. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says that there are 4 types of persons who come to religious life. Now you can decide if these fit you. 1, someone who is wants to be relieved of suffering. Do you feel that that's one of the reasons you're here? Okay, some of you are not saying yes, so we'll go to the next. Searching after wealth. I doubt that most people are here, but will you admit that, think about most religions, what is one of the main reasons why people worship God? Yeah, they want things, right? They pray to God. That's what religion means these days for most people. It's like a checklist, It's like going to a supermarket and making God your order supplier. Here's my list for this year, Lord. Please fulfill it, and if you do, I'll believe in you. And if you don't, I'll change churches. That's the way it is for most people. Okay, well, probably that doesn't fit. Then the third, inquisitiveness. Being inquisitive. Just inquisitiveness. Well, the fourth, searching for the truth. So persons come, but of these 4, certainly the one who wants to get free from suffering, would that be considered pure devotional service? No, you're asking for something, right? You're still saying, God, I want to serve you because I want you to get me free from suffering. It's not bad, but it's not pure devotional service. Someone who says, I want wealth, certainly that's not pure. But it's mixed. It's called, when you do service with a motive, it's called mixed devotional service, not pure devotional service. Why is pure devotional service important? It's the only way by which you can actually achieve God. As long as you mix your devotional service, you can't get a full understanding and relationship with God. Because you're not asking for God, you're asking for the things that you want from Him. When you say, well, what does this mean when we hold up our hands and dance? It means I'm giving up, I'm letting go of everything. And I'm just saying, Hare Krishna, Krishna, I just want you. No conditions. The one devotee, when Krishna comes in the form of Lord Chaitanya, he prays that I don't care even if you give me suffering. You're still my Lord unconditionally. He doesn't pray as long as you can keep it, make it good for me. So this holding the hands up and chanting and dancing means I'm yours unconditionally. The inquisitive person and the person searching after knowledge, it gets a little bit better, especially for those searching for the truth. That comes closer to an aspect of pure devotional service. Now, no one really comes in the beginning absolutely with a pure motive. How do we get that pure motive? By association with those who have purified their motives. By sadhu sangha, by good association. And the whole purpose of this society is to provide such good association. By associating, birds of a feather flock together. By getting associated with persons who are free of desires in terms of service to God, you start to understand what it means to serve God in that mood. And you adjust your thoughts, you adjust your consciousness. You gradually gain knowledge so that you can also give up those attachments. Now, Prabhupada speaks about the most difficult thing to give up. Things which are artificially acquired gradually disappear along with the progress of Bhakti-yoga. Meditation on the lotus feet of the personality of God. You can see when very prominent how prominent Krishna's lotus feet are. Right? When you go close to Krishna, you're supposed to look at the lotus feet of Krishna. Why? Why the feet? Why are the feet important? Because when you are humble, humility is one of the qualities, or one of the aspects of surrender. When you're humble, you feel, you place yourself low. And if I look at you, and if I see you, then that thing which is, to show my humility, I touch your feet. Now we don't have this custom in the West, so when I say that, some of you looking, I don't get it. But because all we understand is handshake. What does shaking the hand mean? Oh, very good. Yeah, shaking the hand means equal, right? You shake the hand of someone who's equal. But how do you show subordination? What do they do in Japan when they meet each other? Right? What do they do? They bow down. From where? From which part of the body do they bow? From the waist. In India, when they show subordination, what do they do? Yeah, they touch the ground with their body before the person. Either with 5 parts of the body, that means the 2 knees, the legs, the hands, and the head, at least. What do the Muslims do? What is the whole meaning of Islam? What does it mean? Submission. Submission. The key word in Islam, submission. And therefore, how many times a day do they bow down to Allah? Every day, no matter what, wherever they are, the world stops, and they face east, and they submit themselves before God. By what means? They touch their bodies to the ground, submitting themselves. And in our tradition, sometimes what do we do? Prostrate the whole body before the Lord. And you'll be, I don't know if you know that, but the Catholics do the same. When the Pope comes, you'll see bishops, will prostrate themselves, full out on the ground. The people ever think what we're doing is weird. All I can say is that they're ignorant of Christianity's traditions. Because the Catholic Church happens to be the oldest church amongst the Christian churches. And when the Pope comes, the bishops, they go horizontal rather than vertical. So this is a way of submitting to the feet of the Lord. Meditation on the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead. How can God have feet if he's not a person? When you say God's lotus feet, you're speaking about a person. How can you love God if he's not a person? How can God have attributes if he's not a person? The meditation on the lotus feet, the first processional step, must show its effect by anartha nivritti. Now listen to this very carefully. If you're meditating on the Lord's feet, you will know that your meditation is successful if it shows the following effect. Anartha nivritti. Anartha nivritti means freedom from unwanted desires. Another way to say it is that if you do meditate on the feet of the Lord, gradually all unwanted desires will vanish. Okay, they're telling you this, is telling you how to get free from desire so that you can eventually achieve pure devotional service. The grossest type of anartha, of unwanted thing, which binds the conditioned soul in material existence is, yes, sex desire. Shouldn't come as a surprise. And this sex desire gradually develops in the union of the male and female. When the male and female are united, the sex desire is further aggravated by the accumulation of buildings, children, friends, relatives, and wealth. When all these are acquired, the conditioned soul, interesting word, isn't it? The conditioned soul. What's the nature of the soul? To be pure, right? But what is the conditioned soul? It's conditioned by what? By these things. This is how the soul becomes conditioned. By what? Accumulation of buildings, children, friends, relatives, and wealth. What do those things create? Desire. So that the originally pure soul becomes conditioned by so many possessions. Overwhelmed by such entanglements and the false sense of ego, or the sense of myself and mind becomes prominent, and the sex desire expands to various political, social, altruistic, philanthropic, and many other unwanted engagements resembling the foam of the sea of waves, which becomes very prominent at one time and at the next moment vanishes as quickly as a cloud in the sky. These grand isms, of so many types of communal efforts are compared to be like foam on the waves, or clouds in the sky. What is the characteristic of clouds in the sky and foam on the waves? Temporary, right? And what can be more temporary than foam on top of a wave? Or clouds in the sky. Similarly, all of these grandiose schemes of human civilization, viewed from the perspective of history, are no more than clouds in the sky. They come and go. And what do they all derive from? This false egotistic conception of myself and mine. A very interesting program I saw the other night on the public service television about Siamese twins. Did you see that program? Oh, very interesting. Siamese twins originally came from there were two twins coming from Siam, which is Thailand. Well, remember what Siam was originally? Thailand, yes. Thailand. Siam. So it's from Sanskrit. So some Sanskrit. They came from Siam. They were twins in the last century, and they were joined together. Siamese twins mean they're born joined together. They got some common part of their body. And so they were imported into America and placed in the circus as, part of the show. Anyway, they went on to marry. They married two sisters, and they had, I believe, between them 11 children, and I don't know how many grandchildren. No, I'm not going to make you envision what that involved. In any case, they wanted to get separated, but they couldn't. And eventually they died. When they died at the same time. Interesting. So there must have been some crucial organs of the body which they shared, and when those organs finished, they died. Both sides of the body died. So anyway, recently they were again Siamese twins born in Thailand. Two girls. Well, it's 2 girls, or what do you call it? Two in one. Like our philosophy, 2 in 1. 2 girls and one would join together, sharing the same, liver, same parts of the skeletal system. I mean, they were, and so 3 legs only. And somehow these, doctors, I think they were born, I missed the first part of the program, but I suspect that the doctors, probably the parents were poor and they didn't know what to do with 2 daughters like this. So they gave them over to science. They brought them to the United States, but now we, are much more civilized, so we don't put them in a freak show. Instead, we put them in the hands of doctors, and the doctors said that, these are 2 persons. Can we give them each their own separate existence? So they went through some incredible studies with all modern scientific knowledge. And they finally began to perform an operation which took 14 hours with, brilliant experts in Philadelphia. And they separated the 2 girls, and they separated them at the age of 3.5, which is unusual because normally you have to do this when they're very young. And this was a very complex thing because they shared crucial organs and they had to rebuild these organs. One of the most interesting things that took place was that when the children were separated, they kept trying to feel the other part of themselves, but they wasn't there anymore. And when the foster parents who were looking after them kept saying, your sister's over there, they would not look. And when the foster parent would go to tend the other sister, they would immediately start to cry and complain. And they exhibit all of these very intense emotions on account of having been separated. But gradually, over a period of time, they adjusted themselves to learn that, because previously, whatever they had in common. This is the point I want to make. They had everything in common. They shared everything in common because they were one body. But now they gradually developed this separate conception, I and mine. And with that conception, it was also interesting to note how one of them was dominant over the other, but the success of the operation was seen in psychologically terms by the fact that the more controlled and less dominant one became equally dominant, which definitely reflects a world conception. It wasn't that there was something wrong with being submissive to the other, and now they could each show strongly their own personalities. And they showed it in terms of I as opposed to her. They would become very upset when attention was given to the other instead of to themselves. That's the reason I got into the whole story of the Swami. To show how the conception of I develops when there's separation. The main difference in all of these pictures with that conception is that none of them thinks separately from Krishna's interest. They don't have false ego. They have ego. Ego means I acknowledge my own existence, but it's not a false ego because their ego is acknowledged in the sense that I understand that I exist in relationship to God. I don't have any separate existence. Actually, that's the characteristic of every devotee sitting in this room. Their existence is explained in their relationship to God. Just like, KY was telling me about my disciple, my Krishna, that everything she does thinking of her Guru and Krishna. When she goes swimming, I don't know how she does it, but she thinks about her Guru. What is that? I don't know the details. She thinks of her Guru and Krishna. And when she's doing studying for her classes and her tests, she thinks of her Guru and Krishna. And when she offers a prasadam, she thinks of the Guru and Krishna. Everything she connects to Krishna. You can't think of anything separate. And that's love. That is love. A mother with a small, dependent infant cannot think for a second of anything separate from the interest of that child. That's love. No false ego. But false ego means I and mine. So how does that become aggravated? Through the sexual act. And then it expands into possessions. And those possessions expand into a large dimension. My community. So the black people, I'm black, they're my people. And you're white people. Or we're Americans, this is my nation. And you're Russia, that's your nation. Or we're human beings, but you're not, you're animals. And it goes, or we're men, but you're women. We want our rights, but the women want their rights. And it goes on and on, extending this. What is this? We're not thinking about the extension of false ego. All of these grandiose schemes for dividing up, human society is simply the expansion of false ego. And it all derives from this sex act. The conditioned soul is encircled by such products, as well as products of sex desire, and therefore Bhakti-yoga leads to gradual evaporation of the sex desire. And this may be a reason why you may not want to become a devotee. One time I was preaching in California, Berkeley, to some young guys, and they said, "What are your principles?" I said, "No meat, fish, or eggs, no gambling, no intoxication, and no illicit sex." And they looked at me and said, "Why bother being alive? What's the point of life? If you can't do those four things, then what's the use of living?" So when people hear this, they get very disturbed. Just like people come in this temple and say, "Why are you separating men from women?" As you'll see, we don't say that men and women can't be together, but we do say that as long as this tendency to identify with the body is there, you can't get liberated from the body. You will have to take another birth in the material world. As long as you identify this, and what is the most difficult identification to give up? The identification of gender. I'm a man. I'm a woman. It's very difficult to give this up. That example is given of, who was it? The Muslim ruler who asked the question? It was Akbar, a famous Muslim ruler in India, asked his minister, when is this sex desire, when do you get free from it? And the minister said, I'll tell you when you get free from it. And he brought Akbar at one point, he called Akbar and said, "I want to bring you to the house of the dying man, but bring your daughter." And Akbar was the king, the emperor of India, powerful position. He comes into a home of a dying man, everybody knew Akbar, with his young, beautiful daughter. And the dying man, in his last moment, when the emperor of the whole of India walked in, he didn't look at the emperor. What did the old man look at?
His daughter.
The daughter. Then Akbar can understand that you don't get free from sex desire, even at the final moment. But what is the problem? You don't have the ability to fulfill the desire. It's not that old age means less desire. It just means less ability to fulfill the desire. Of course, this has to be overcome. If it's not, what happens? It remains a desire within your heart. So if you desire the opposite sex, then what do you get in your next life? You get the body of that sex that you desire. We don't want any material body in our next life, particularly. Therefore, we try to gradually get free from this desire, and all desires. But this is the most binding of all the knots of desire. All conditioned souls are mad after these different forms of sex desire, namely profit, adoration, and distinction. And one shall see for himself how much he has been freed from such material hankerings based primarily on the sex desire. As a person feels his hunger satisfied after eating each morsel of food, he must suddenly be able to see the degree to which he has been freed from sex desire. The sex desire is diminished along with its various forms by the process of Bhakti-yoga, because devotional service automatically, by the grace of God, effectively results in knowledge and renunciation, even if the devotee is not materially very well educated. The devotional service is so nice. Even if you don't have a very, you're not very well educated, it doesn't matter. Not materially educated, it doesn't matter. If you engage in devotional service, it automatically, by its nature, makes you attached to Krishna. When you get attached to a good habit, it becomes very easy to give up a bad habit. That's why people who want to get rid of a bad habit, what do? They have to replace it with something better. So what could be better than Krishna's personal service and association? When you have it, automatically you develop detachment, renunciation, and knowledge, even if you're not materially educated. You don't have to have material education to get this type of advancement. Knowledge means knowing things as they are. And if by deliberation it is found that there are things which are all necessary, naturally, the person who has acquired knowledge leaves aside, and if by deliberation it is found that there are things which are at all unnecessary, naturally the person who has acquired knowledge leaves aside such unwanted things. When the conditioned soul finds, by culture of knowledge, that material necessities are unwanted things, he becomes detached from such unwanted things. This stage of knowledge is called vairagya, or detachment from unwanted things. We have previously discussed that the transcendentalist is required to be self-sufficient and should not beg from the rich blind persons to fulfill the bare necessities of life. That's why when people see us going on a book distribution, they say, why don't you get a job? Stop begging. Prabhupada used to become very upset and said, we're not begging. We're selling books. We're giving knowledge. And the only reason we even ask you to give some money in return is that if you don't, you won't take the book seriously. We're giving knowledge. And you can see the value, right? Some of you got a book, right? A couple of you came from Oklahoma. Am I right? And you got a book, right? Internet distributor, right? What is it? Did you know they came to the book? Right, well that's why we distribute these books. Now Indra Nuja, if you know him, he's distinction. He doesn't have so many material desires. And he lives very simple. He didn't have to go out into Oklahoma and beg money. He's very simple. He got a couple of shirts and dhotis and gumcha and a watch. And he's happy. Well, some chanting piece. And as long as he can chant Hare Krishna, he's happy. So why does he take the trouble to go out and distribute these books? Because he knows this knowledge has not been available before. People are pious in this country. People believe, 95% of Americans still say they believe in God. But their knowledge of God is very limited. They believe in God, they're pious. American people go to worship more than any people in the world. And they give in donations more than any people in the world towards charitable causes, towards religion. But they don't have much knowledge of God. So this knowledge is very valuable. The stage of knowledge is called vairagya. And what is that knowledge? Real knowledge? It leads to detachment from unwanted things. We have previously discussed this, Prabhupada says. Bhaktivedanta Swami has suggested some alternatives for the bare necessities of life, namely the problems of eating. He says you don't have to get utensils for eating, use your hands. He says you don't have to get a place to sleep, you can lie down on the ground. You don't have to get, he says you don't have to get a shelter, there are caves. course, it's hard in Dallas to find a cave. You could probably find a deserted building. Then it's not very nice. And neither do we recommend that. But he has not suggested any alternative for sex satisfaction. One who has the sex desire still with him should not try at all to accept the renounced order of life. For one who has not attained to this stage, there is no question of a renounced order of life. So, by the gradual process of devotional service, under the guidance of a proper spiritual master, and following the principles of the Bhagavatam, one must be able at least to control the gross sex desire before one accepts the renounced order of life factually. So purification means getting free gradually from sex desire, and this is attained how? By meditation on the person of the Lord as described herein, beginning from the feet. I noticed this, that when I'm with these, you study with so many professors and scholars, but when it comes down to it, their enjoyment comes from very gross forms of pleasure. First thing that I felt in the 30 years, or more than felt, when I went to university, I got so disgusted because I felt, what can I learn from these people? I could just get academic knowledge, mundane knowledge. Really, I want to learn something which I don't already. I want to learn how to be a better quality person, and these people can't teach that to me. When I met Prabhupada, my whole life changed. Because then I met someone whose quality of life was so significant, different. It wasn't based on Prabhupada's knowledge that most impressed me. It was the quality of Prabhupada's character that impressed me. One should not try to go upwards artificially without seeing for himself how much he has been released from the sex desire. The smiling face of the Lord is the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, and there are many upstarts who at once try to begin with the 10th canto, and especially with the 5 chapters which delineate Rasa Lila of the Lord. This is certainly improper. By such improper study of hearing the Bhagavatam, the material opportunists have played havoc by indulgence in sex life in the name of Bhagavatam. This vilification of the Bhagavatam is rendered by the acts of the so-called devotees. One should be free from all kinds of sex desire before he tries to make a show of the recital of Bhagavatam. In other words, there are different pastimes which are described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that we're reading. And the most confidential pastimes, which are Krishna's loving affairs with the gopis, just like this picture here, that's described in more detail, are found in the 10th canto. Prabhupada says that until one is free from sex desire, if one sees, or rather if one reads all of these things without proper qualification, one will develop more material desires. Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur clearly defines the import of purification as cessation from sex indulgence. He says, Yatha yatha dhischa sudyate vishayalam bhatyam tyajati tata tata darayat iti chitta sudhi taratman yenayiva dhyana taratmayam uktam. And as one gets free from the intoxication of sex indulgence by purification of intelligence, one should step forward for the next meditation, or in other words, the progress of meditation on the different limbs of the transcendental body of the Lord should be enhanced in proportion to the progress of the purification of the heart. The conclusion is that those who are still entrapped by sex indulgence should never progress to meditation above the feet of the Lord. Therefore, recital of Srimad Bhagavatam by them should be restricted to the first and second cantos of the great literature. One must complete the purificatory process by assimilating the contents of the first 9 cantos. Then one should be admitted into the realm of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We'll stop here and ask if there are any questions. Dr.
If you separate the sex desire from self-expected self, the active self from time to time can be used as self as right?
Yes.
I see desire versus that active service.
Yes. Thank you. Prabhupada has not in his purport brought out a very good point, which you have brought out. Namely, what is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Tamosmi Bharatasava, that Krishna says, I am that sex act, when it is not performed irreligiously. When the sex act is performed under religious guidance, then Krishna says it is itself devotional service. So that religious guidance means that the sex act should be done for the purpose of procreating children. That means that in Vedic culture, a man and woman who were married were allowed to have sex once in a month until the time of procreation. A certain day of the month, when the woman is most fertile, they would have sex, and there was a samskar performed. Samskar means a purificatory ceremony, which Prabhupada has given us. He made it he adjusted it for ISKCON, that the purification ceremony for sex for devotees in ISKCON is that they should chant 50 rounds on their japa beads before having sex. And then they could try to conceive a child, taking permission from the authorities. They could try to conceive a child. So, but what does this mean practically? How many children is one going to want to have? Nowadays, people don't have generally more than 2 or 3 children. Some might have a few more, but that means that if the woman is fertile and the man is potent, they may only have sex 5, 6 times in their whole marriage. It's not that they are allowed to have a license for sex life. Now, I must tell you that not all gurus, you could say, leaving aside our institution, are so strict about this. But this was the standard Prabhupada gave, and it is a standard that he learned from his guru, and it is a standard that was accepted by the strictest adherents in the tradition. And Prabhupada gave that as a standard for ISKCON. Now, if one thinks about that, one may consider, if you can only have sex 5 times, what's the use of getting married? But still there is some purpose. Because it is not that sex is the only way to fulfill sexual desire. In other words, by being together with a woman, a man also derives a certain satisfaction to the sex desire. And by, taking care of children, that is also fulfilled. So, marriage has a very real purpose to serve. That if one cannot get free from sex desire, then they're advised to get married. And it's not that the only way then that they can fulfill that sex desire is by the actual physical act of sex. But by having sex under religious principles and by fulfilling the consequences of that sexual act, namely having children and raising the children nicely and being dutiful to husband and wife, being dutiful to each other, then the sex desire gradually will be reduced. And therefore there are 4 stages of life: brahmacharya, the student life; grihastha, the married life; vanaprastha, the renounced life, retired life, and sannyasa, renounced life. So if one goes through these gradually, then when one finally comes to the point of renunciation, it is very easy. That's why when Prabhupada was initiating, because he only had a limited time, he gave sannyas to very young men. And one time at a sannyas ceremony, Prabhupada was crying. And Prabhupada said, I should not be doing this. I should not be giving sannyas to such young men. He said, you're trying to help and spread this movement. And naturally, if you can remain free from family entanglement, you can have so much opportunity for wider preaching. And within our movement, more than 50% of those who got sannyas, they could not keep up their vow. So, we are more strict now. Generally, we only award sannyas in this movement now to those who have reached the age of 50. We have set certain rules in place, and a person has to prepare themselves for 5 years before getting sannyas. showing over those 5 years that they're qualified. Because we don't want to see people who are sannyasis give up their sannyas vow. If anyone gives up their vow, it's a disturbance to society. If a husband and wife don't fulfill their vows to each other, it disturbs. Just like when I speak to so many young men and women today, and they're from broken families, and they feel so much anguish in their heart. Why broken families? Even when the families are not broken, sometimes the fathers and mothers are not, loving enough, and the children suffer so much. Of course, I tell them that in a sense this helps them to hold more tightly to Guru and Krishna. So I think in some ways it's not bad. It's like my parents separated, but I think that in one sense it was a blessing because my parents separated, and then I didn't have a father. So Prabhupada was my father. Not only was my spiritual father, he was my material father. He practically was my father in every respect. So I think it was a blessing, this practice. It wasn't a bad thing. Although actually it was a bad thing. Therefore, for a devotee, material setbacks are spiritual blessings if they take it in the right way. Sometimes devotees suffer some setback, like financial setback. A married man may have a business setback, but somehow it may help him spiritually. Narada Muni's, his mother was born to a maidservant. Maidservant means, we don't hear about Narada Muni's father. Who's Narada Muni's father? Who? He's born to a maidservant. Maidservant means very low class, by class distinction. It means she doesn't know who her husband is. A Shudra is not required to have marriage for sex. Shudra is freely mixed. That's the nature of Shudra life. In any case, we don't hear who is Narada Muni's father. Narada Muni, Narada Rishi, Deva Rishi, the Rishi, the sage of the gods. We don't know who his father is. That's not very auspicious or very fortunate. And we're still, at the age of 5, his mother died. No parent, no relatives. 5-year-old, can you imagine a 5-year-old in Dallas? Well, he was a 5-year-old in the jungle. But he's Narada Muni. He's Narada Muni. He sat down and he said, he started to chant the Lord's names. And he became God, realized, he thought this was a blessing. No attachment. So, in any case, the point that I want to in response to your question is yes, within marriage, sex life can be done for the purpose of procreation. Then there is nothing wrong. Chaitanya.
In that earlier discussion of meditation on your personalness, how that the person is suffering, is there any purification at all from the personal meditation?
Is there any purification from a personal meditation? There is some purification from a personal meditation, but it's not permanent because it doesn't satisfy the soul. Prabhupada gives the example of many yoga societies that teach in personal meditation, but the sannyasis, who are supposed to be the most advanced in yoga, are always seen to be engaged in mundane welfare work. In other words, although they do the personal meditation, they can't get material satisfaction from it. They can't feel well-grounded. There's something missing, and they act it out on the material platform. They look for some satisfaction, still materially. So in the ultimate issue, no. But if it's done, as the Bhagavad Gita describes, but then see what it says, that if you can do in personal meditation with the following, then it says, okay, listen. It says, here, but those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed and immovable, the impersonal perception, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engage in the welfare of all at last achievement. But it's possible, he says. But in the next verse he says, in that discipline, Progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. How do you do this meditation with given the body you have? How do you avoid desiring to eat palatable food, given the fact that you have a tongue? How do you avoid the desire to see lovely things, given the fact that you have eyes? How do you avoid the need to touch something sensual, given the fact that you have a tactile senses? The deity worship and the process of bhakti satisfies these senses. Rishikesha, Rishikenam, Sevanam, Bhakti Rujite. This is the very nature of bhakti. It engages the senses in the service of the master of the senses. So I want to see something beautiful, I look at Krishna. I look at the pictures of Krishna. I want to touch something very nice and sensual, I touch Krishna's form and help to dress him. I want to taste something very pleasant and good tasting, I taste Krishna Prashana. The Japanese are going, yes, I think I'm getting hungry. Looking at the clock. See, I had decided I was going to eat this morning, that's why I did this. That's why I'm going over to I decided I have nothing to lose. In person. My vow is one of the personal vow. I will not eat anything. For Japanese, a devotional vow. I'm hungry for Prashana. Well, we will wrap it up with one or two questions more.
By someone knowing both paths, the person who chooses the personal path.
Someone knowing both paths, that's the same question of, you see, to really know, they wouldn't. But to know in just in the sense of theory, that's not knowing. I mean, from a theoretical point of view, theoretically, when we say worship a God with form, they say, oh, form? I want to worship that which is higher than form. Form is limited. Well, let me tell you God's name. Names, sounds, names, these are limitations. Everything you're talking about is material. I want that theoretical God which is beyond limitation. You see, so from a theoretical point of view, impersonalism sounds like it's grander. But that's because they don't know. If you know about Krishna's name, you will know that it's not limited. Krishna's form, what can Krishna do with his form? Well, for example, with one of his forms, Mahavishnu, he's lying in the form of Mahavishnu, just by breathing, universes come out of his body. Now, is that a limited form? That you can breathe, you go into water and you breathe bubbles. And God lies in an ocean, when he breathes universes. That's not limited. That kind of body is not limited. When Krishna is dancing with the gopis, and there's thousands of gopis who want to dance with him, what does Krishna do? Immediately expands himself into as many gopis, as many Krishnas as there are gopis. Krishna marries 16,108 queens. And what does he do? He doesn't run from one town to the other. He immediately expands himself to be with. So when you know about this form, then when we say worship of form, you may think, well, that is not limited. I get the benefit of both. I get that unlimited form. That's Krishna's form. Not limited form, unlimited name.
Because we are embodied and either male or female, we have certain things that we do in devotional service. We might do something different because we're male or female. How does one overcome the false ego in that way?
Yeah, we should not artificially think, I'm not my body, and therefore not take account of the body. Just like when sometimes in the morning, I always point this out to those sitting in the Amen corner over there, Sankirtan devotees, said, look, our bhaktas are always very transcendental. What is the nature of a bhakta? Always where it can be as cold, it can be freezing cold, and they'll show up at Mangalarti in a t-shirt. Well, it's a fact. Our bhaktas are always, underdressed, because they're transcendental. So they think until they get a cold. And then they can't do service, right? For 1 week, they can't do any service. And they can't, they don't see any connection. Because they're just practicing to be yogis. So that type of detachment is unwanted. What should we think? This body belongs to Krishna. No, I've already surrendered my body to Krishna. Now, there's a saying, when you take care of your own property, you should take care of it. But when you take care of the property of someone else that's entrusted to you, you have to take care of it even more. So if you've already surrendered your body to Krishna, it's not yours. Therefore, you have to give more care to your body now that you're a devotee, because you have given your body to Krishna. Similarly, you have to take note of the fact that you're in a male body or a female body. You can't ignore that. Now, if you say we should come beyond that, yes, we should, but at the right stage, not at the wrong stage. If I think I'm not my body, it doesn't matter, and I can associate with the opposite sex as much as I want, because I'm not my body. Well, if you are not yet really at that stage, then there's the mixing together of sexes is described to be like butter and fire. When butter goes near fire, what happens? It melts. That's what Prabhupada said, that the men should stamp on your forehead, keep cool. Keep the butter cool. It doesn't melt. Even in Vedic culture, there was not unlimited mixing. In the original Vedic culture, in the homes, the men had their area of the house, and the women had their area. Now, what is the problem today? The present day, what do they call the families? They're called nuclear families. Nuclear family, what does it mean? Husband, wife, and 1 or 2 children. What is the problem with that? The only friend the wife has is her husband. The only friend the husband has is his wife. So they have to constantly be together. But what was the original system in India? Joint family. So many brothers, so many wives were there. All the ladies, with the wives or the husbands, they were all sisters to each other. So many ladies in the house that the women could associate with and have as friends. So many men that the men could associate with. So everything was in a much more normal way. This nuclear family has made everything very unnatural. And it creates attachment, unnecessary association, and aggravated attachments. That's the advantage of living in a community like this, if you're wise enough to do so. Even though we have separate homes for each of the families, I hope that they have such close relationships that they think my sister is in the house next door. And their relationships with their sisters or brothers should be so nice and close that they're just as happy to be with them. Not just that I have to be with my husband all the time, or I have to be with my wife all the time. That's one of the advantages of living in a community setting.
On the other hand, wouldn't that be true that you cannot forcibly tell yourself about this body? Surrendering and it's true that you perceive that.
You can tell yourself, but as you say, it's not going to mean anything until you realize. You can tell yourself. I mean, we do tell. That's why we're giving this class. But the realization is something different than it. Yan and Vigyan, knowledge and realization are not the same. But what does realization come from? It starts with some Yan. So knowledge is required, but the realization of it means practiced knowledge. You have to practice. So that practicing is done over a period of time, not automatically. It may happen immediately, but rarely. Generally, it takes time. So you've got a lot of time. You should make a plan how you can become Krishna conscious in this lifetime. By the end of life, you should go back to Godhead and not have to take another birth in the material world. That's the success of human life. So make a plan accordingly. Any ladies have questions? Yes.
In order to transcend desires, one should meditate on Krishna and his pastimes. But then when one achieves the platform of a pure devotee, isn't there still a desire to want to serve?
Yes, thank you. When I was speaking, I kept saying you have to get free from desires, and Marina has correctly said. But there are desires for serving Krishna which we should not give up. When we say to become free from desires, we mean become free from selfish, egotistic, mundane desire. But spiritual desire is welcome. In fact, what do we mean when we pray Hare Krishna? What does the Hare Krishna prayer mean? Oh Krishna, please let me serve you. Now, I would think we will end. The doctor has looked at his watch, reminding me. He may even have some patients with him. Anyway, we have many hungry souls here. The Jagli will not forgive me, but only an hour over two. So thank you very much for your attention. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki